is his space. And from the cradle, Zionist police violently raid Al-Aqsa Mosque. Gaza resistance responds. About 400 Palestinian worshippers were arrested during the assault of the Muslim holy site on the 14th day of Ramadan. Zionist shock troops arrested about 400 Palestinian worshippers in the early hours of 5 April after launching a brutal raid of the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex in occupied East Jerusalem. Tel Aviv says the violent raid was launched to dislodge agitators who had barricaded themselves inside the Al-Qibla prayer hall. The worshippers reportedly did this after Jewish supremacist groups announced plans to raid the Muslim holy site. Worshippers stayed at Al-Aqsa overnight to practice itikaf after tens of thousands attended the earlier Taraweeh night prayer. Zionist troops claimed the roof of the mosque, smashed some of the windows, fired sound bombs on the worshippers inside. The Palestinians tried to resist with stones and fireworks. Dozens of heavily armed police then broke into the prayer hall and fired a barrage of sound bombs, tear gas, and rubber-coated bullets. They also beat them heavily. The Palestine Red Crescent Society declared a state of alert in occupied Al-Quds and said it received multiple reports of injuries but was unable to estimate the number of casualties. Additionally, Zionist forces prevented ambulances from reaching those who were badly injured. According to the Commission for Palestinian Prisoner Affairs, the police started to release some of the detained worshippers on the condition that they be removed from Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Old City and Al-Quds for a week. Dozens of extremist settlers were escorted into the courtyards of Al-Aqsa Mosque after the raid ended. In response to the violent attack on the 14th day of Ramadan, the military wing of the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the DFLP, the martyr Omar al-Qassam forces fired a barrage of rockets from the Gaza Strip towards nearby Zionist settlements. One of the rockets hit a factory in the Sterdot industrial zone, causing material damage. In response, the Zionist force bombed several sites in the besieged Gaza Strip, including the Abu Jarad site west of Gaza City and the Areen site northeast of the Nusayrat refugee camp in the Central Strip, according to local reports. The Palestinian resistance in turn fired surface-to-air missiles at the Zionist aircraft carrying out the attacks. Zionist's latest assault on Al-Aqsa Mosque was widely condemned by Palestinians as thousands mobilized across the occupied West Bank. Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of the Hamas resistance movement, said in a statement, "What's happening in Al-Aqsa Mosque is an unprecedented crime. Everyone must bear their responsibility, Palestinians and Muslims alike." He also urged Palestinians to march to Al-Aqsa and protect it. Ziad al-Naqla, the leader of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, released a similar statement saying, "The events at Al-Aqsa are a threat to our sacred places of worship, and the Palestinian people must be prepared for the imminent decisive confrontation with the Zionists." Meanwhile, the West Bank's ruling Fatah movement said that what happened was dangerous and warned that Zionists crossed the red lines. Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia all released statements strongly condemning the raid and the attack on the worshippers. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia condemns this blatant storming and expresses its rejection of these practices that undermine peace efforts and contradict international principles in respect of religious sanctities. The statement from Riyadh reads, Zionists also blasted the Zionist aggression, saying that, or Iran also blasted the Zionist aggression, saying that the brutal attack by the usurping Zionist regime's military on Palestinian pilgrims and worshippers inside Al-Aqsa has once again laid bare the criminal and inhumane nature of the regime before the eyes of the world. And from Memo, hundreds detained in Zionist latest raid on Al-Aqsa as Passover begins. Paramedics from the Red Crescent were stopped from entering the masjid to attend to the wounded. More than 400 Palestinians have been detained and dozens were wounded in Zionist latest raids on Al-Aqsa Mosque, which came as the Jewish holiday Passover began. Large numbers of Zionist occupation forces raided Al-Aqsa Mosque and assaulted Muslim worshippers, shooting stun grenades and rubber-coated metal bullets directly into Al-Qibla Mosque and beating worshippers with their guns. Palestinian lawyer Faras al-Jabrini told Al-Mayadeen News that more than 400 people had been detained from inside the mosque compound or its gates. the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, dozens of worshippers were wounded in the Zionist occupation's attacks, noting that its paramedics have been prevented from entering Al-Aqsa Mosque. In a statement, the Red Crescent said the Zionist occupation forces attacked its ambulances, prevented them from reaching the areas where several people were reported to be in need of medical assistance. The Palestinian Authority and Palestinian factions condemned the Zionist aggression. The PA Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh blamed the Zionist occupation authorities for any violence that occurs as a result of the attacks on Al-Aqsa, while PA security services cracked down on spontaneous demonstrations launched in response to the attacks. Hamas and other factions warned the Zionist occupation against its aggression and said it would pay the price for its attacks. The Palestinian resistance in Gaza launched at least 9 rockets at Zionists in response to the attack. Many were intercepted by the Iron Dome, and one hit a factory in Sderot. Zionist forces attack worshippers in Al-Aqsa. This is from Al Jazeera. Israeli forces fire stun grenades and arrest worshippers from inside the mosque, drawing condemnation from the Palestinians. The Arab League is set to hold an emergency meeting to discuss Zionist police raid on the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Al-Quds that left at least 12 Palestinians injured, as Zionist Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he was working to maintain the status quo at the holy site. The Arab League meeting has been called by Jordan, Egypt, and Palestinian officials, with tensions remaining high in Jerusalem since Zionist police attacked worshippers in the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound overnight Wednesday during the holy month of Ramadan. The raids continued into the morning when Zionist forces were once again seen assaulting and pushing Palestinians out of the compound and preventing them from praying before Zionists were allowed in under police protection. The League had earlier condemned the attack, with Secretary General Ahmed Abul Gates saying in statement, "The extremist approaches that control the policy of the Zionist government will lead to widespread confrontations with the Palestinians if they're not put to an end." At least 400 Palestinians were arrested on Wednesday and remain in Zionist custody, according to Palestinian officials. They're being held at a police station in Atarat in occupied East Al-Quds. Palestinian witnesses said Zionist forces used excessive force, including stun grenades, tear gas, causing suffocation injuries to the worshippers, and beating with batons and rifles. From Middle East Eye, Zionist forces attack worshippers in violent Al-Aqsa Mosque raid. Zionist forces brutally assaulted dozens of Palestinian worshippers inside Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied Al-Quds on Tuesday night and forcibly removed them from the site, where they were peacefully observing the holy month of Ramadan. Dozens of heavily armed officers stormed the site, used stun grenades, and fired tear gas into the Qibla prayer hall building with the Silver Dome, where hundreds of men, women, elderly people, and children were staying overnight to pray. Some eyewitnesses said rubber-coated steel bullets were also fired. Zionist forces then beat worshippers with batons and riot guns, wounding many before arresting them. Their conditions were not immediately made clear. Videos from inside the mosque show Zionist officers repeatedly hitting people with batons while they appeared to lie on the floor. Meanwhile, the cries for help from women and children could be heard in the background. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society said it received multiple reports of injuries at Al-Aqsa Mosque, but was unable to estimate the number of casualties as Zionist forces blocked medics from reaching the wounded. One medic was attacked by a Zionist police officer and wounded outside one of the mosque's gates. A PRCS spokesperson said they were informed that those wounded in the raid have been evacuated but they don't know by who and where they were taken. Local media said dozens were wounded in the assault, and the injuries have included bruises, fractures, breathlessness, and inhaling of tear gas. Some videos from the scene published online showed people apparently unconscious. A female eyewitness told local media that women were let out, but the men were harshly beaten and arrested. Every single one of them was harshly beaten, every single man, she said. Zionist police released a statement saying it detained dozens of rioters from Al-Aqsa Mosque to restore order at the site. The Palestinian Commission of Detainees Affairs estimates that between 400 and 500 men have been arrested. After the raid, local mosques around Jerusalem called on people through speakerphones to rally in support of those assaulted. Confrontations between residents and police broke out in several locations across the city. A resident of the old city who preferred not to give a name told Middle East Eye that the sound of screams during the raid could be heard everywhere. Al-Quds is on fire right now. You can hear the sound of grenades everywhere, he said. We can hear ambulances all over the city. The situation's not reassuring. In the occupied West Bank, hundreds of Palestinians took to the streets to condemn the assault and confront Zionist troops at checkpoints and army posts. Rallies also took place in Gaza, al-Fahim, a Palestinian town in Zionist Al-Quds, or the Zionist entity, and the Jordanian capital, Amman. Rockets were later fired from the Gaza Strips toward the Zionist entity. At least one rocket landed inside the country and caused damage to a food factory, according to Zionist media. This was followed by airstrikes from the Zionist military targeting several locations in the besieged strip. No casualties were recorded from either side. Shootings at Zionist targets in the wake of the raid were also reported overnight in Nablus, Jenin, Tulkarm, Hebron, Ramallah, and Jericho, leading to some armed clashes between Palestinians and Zionist troops. One Zionist soldier was wounded in a fire exchange in Al-Khalil and transferred to a hospital for treatment, Zionist media outlets reported. Zionist forces closed the Old City and Al-Aqsa after the raid. The masjid was briefly reopened for dawn prayer at around 5 a.m. local times, but police denied access to anyone under the age of 40. After dawn prayer, Zionist forces once again dispersed worshippers and forced them out of the masjid to pave the way for settler incursions that began around 7 a.m. All they had were prayer mats. The initial raid started around 10 p.m. on Tuesday when police officers were first spotted entering Al-Aqsa. They began by removing people from the courtyards of the masjid. Dozens of worshippers had stayed there to practice itikaf after tens of thousands attended the earlier Taraweeh night prayer. Itikaf is a non-mandatory religious practice that's common in Ramadan, whereby worshippers stay inside masjids overnight to pray, reflect, and recite the Quran. While those seated in the courtyards were being removed, dozens of other worshippers locked themselves inside the Qibli prayer hall to evade the Zionist crackdown. Around an hour later, Zionist police broke down the windows of the Qibli mosque and fired tear gas and stun grenades at worshippers to force them out while the power inside the building was out. They then managed to break into the mosque and started assaulting worshippers. Najee Bekairet, the deputy director of the Islamic Waqaf at Al-Aqsa Masjid, described the violent raid in an interview with the Al Jazeera as a premeditated attack. He said police carried it out in the manner they did to send a message to the police or to the Palestinians that Zionists are the sole sovereign over Al-Aqsa that can decide where or who can enter the site and when. What were the people inside doing other than praying? All they had were prayer mats. The raid was widely condemned by Palestinians. Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of the Hamas movement, said in a statement, "What's happening in Al-Aqsa Mosque is an unprecedented crime. Everyone must bear their responsibility, Palestinians and Muslims alike." He urged Palestinians in the West Bank and Zionist Israel to march to Al-Aqsa Mosque and protect it. Ziad Nakla, the leader of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement, echoed a similar message. The events at Al-Aqsa Mosque are a threat to our sacred places of worship, and the Palestinian people must be prepared for the imminent decisive confrontation with Zionist Israel, he said in a statement. The Fatah movement said what happened was dangerous and warned that Zionist occupation will pay the price. Nabil Abu Rudaina, the presidential spokesperson of the Palestinian Authority, said Zionist forces crossed the red lines. What the occupation is doing right now at holy sites such as Al-Aqsa and attacking of worshippers is an example of the relentless war against Palestinian people and the Arab nations, which will ignite fires across the region, Abu Radina said. Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia all released statements strongly condemning the raid and the attack on worshippers. Zionist authorities have been removing worshippers from Al-Aqsa Mosque every night since the start of Ramadan after the Taraweeh prayer ends around 9 p.m. local time, although without this widespread use of violence. They've also been restricting who can enter the site and when, in what Palestinians say is an infringement on their freedom of religious practice. Itikaf at Al-Aqsa is not allowed by Zionist authorities outside of the last 10 days of Ramadan, a ban that Palestinians refuse to comply with. Zionist forces regularly empty the masjid of Palestinians outside the 5 Muslim prayers, especially overnight and after dawn prayer, to ensure a smooth incursion of Zionist settlers, which takes place around 7:30 a.m. local time. Temple movement groups which facilitate the settler incursions and advocate for the destruction of Al-Aqsa have called for mass stormings throughout the week-long Passover holiday, which starts on Wednesday. They've also called for conducting ritual animal slaughter at the site, which would trigger anger from Palestinians and Muslims worldwide. Palestinian groups have urged mass presence at the site this week to prevent the planned animal slaughter and mass incursions. Al-Aqsa Mosque is an Islamic site where unsolicited visit, prayers, and rituals by non-Muslims are forbidden, according to decades-long international agreements. Zionist groups, in coordination with authorities, have long violated the delicate arrangement and facilitated raids of the site and performed prayers and religious rituals. And from Al Jazeera, Zionist forces carry out violent raid at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Zionist police stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque, firing stun grenades and beating Palestinian worshippers during Ramadan. Zionist forces have stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque and occupied East Al-Quds as they fired stun grenades and tear gas at Palestinian worshippers in a violent raid at Islam's third holiest site during the holy month of Ramadan. The official Palestinian news agency Wafa said dozens of worshippers who were spending the night praying were injured in the police raid at dawn on Wednesday, drawing condemnation from the Palestinian and Arab nations. At least 400 Palestinians were arrested on Wednesday who remain in Zionist custody, according to Palestinian officials. The Zionist raid comes as Muslims mark the holy month of Ramadan and Jews prepare to begin the Passover festival on Wednesday evening, raising fears of wider conflagration. A similar raid 2 years ago had triggered a wider conflict, with Zionists launching an 11-day assault on Gaza Strip. The 35-acre mosque compound is referred to as Al-Haram al-Sharif, or the Noble Sanctuary by Muslims, and as the Temple Mount by Jews. The site's been the most contested piece of territory in the Holy Land since Zionists occupied East Al-Quds, including the Old City in 1967, along with the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Zionist police say they moved in after several law-breaking youths and masked agitators brought fireworks, sticks, and stones and barricaded themselves into the masjid. Police say they dispersed groups of youths with stun grenades and rubber bullets inside the masjid compound. One officer was injured in the leg, while some 350 people were arrested, they said. Tensions have been steadily rising since Zionist Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's new far-right government took office last year. The police forces overseen by Itamar Ben-Gvir, an ultranationalist with a history of violence, rhetoric, and actions against Palestinians. The Palestinian leadership condemned the attack on the worshippers. The spokesman of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, Nabil Abu Radaini, warned Israel that such a move exceeds all red lines and will lead to a large explosion. The government of Jordan, which serves as the custodian of the mosque, condemned the Zionist raid in the strongest terms. The foreign minister warned of the consequences of the dangerous escalation and held Zionists responsible for the safety of the blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque. Zionist Palestinian violence has surged over the last year as the Zionist militaries carried out nearly daily raids on Palestinian cities, towns, and villages to quell Palestinian resistance against Zionist occupation. More than 90 Palestinians have been killed by Zionist fire this year. Palestinian attacks against Zionists have killed 15 people in the same period. From Al-Manar, wide condemnations over brutal Zionist raid on Al-Aqsa. The brutal Israeli raid on Al-Aqsa Mosque on Wednesday was met with wide condemnations by Arab and Muslim states. The Arab League denounced the attack, warning of widespread confrontation with the Zionist occupation. The extremist approaches that control the policy of the Zionist government will lead to widespread confrontations with the Palestinians if they are not put to an end, League Secretary General Ahmed Abu-Ghait said in a statement cited by Reuters news agency. Iran said the raid has once again laid bare the criminal and inhumane nature of the Zionist regime before the eyes of the world. This crime strongly condemned and deserves the immediate reaction of the Muslim world, freedom-loving people around the world, as well as responsible international bodies, Nasser Kanaani, spokesman of the Iranian Foreign Ministry, posted on his Twitter account. For its part, Saudi Arabia slammed as blatant the Zionist attacks on worshippers inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. In a statement, the kingdom's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said it's following their great concern the Zionist occupation forces storming of the courtyards of Al-Aqsa Mosque, assaulting worshippers and arresting a number of Palestinian citizens. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia condemns this blatant storming and expresses its rejection of these practices that undermine peace efforts and contradict international principles in respect of religious sanctities, reaffirming its firm position and supporting all efforts aimed at ending the occupation and reaching a just and comprehensive solution to the Palestinian cause, the statement added. Egypt denounced the raid as a blatant assault in violation of all international laws and norms. In a statement, the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which called on Israeli occupation authorities to stop these attacks immediately, Egypt holds the occupation authorities responsible for this dangerous escalation, which could undermine the truce efforts in which Egypt's engaged with its regional and international partners. As it condemned the assault on Islam's third holiest site, Jordan called for an urgent Arab League meeting. Jordanian state news agency reported that Amman, with coordination with Palestinian and Egypt, called the AL session. Qatar has also condemned the Zionist assault as another violation of international law. In a statement, the Qatar Foreign Ministry said that these brutal criminal practices are a serious escalation and a blatant infringement of the holy places, an extension of the policy of Judaizing Al-Quds, a violation of international law and resolutions of international legitimacy. From Middle East Eye, Al-Aqsa Mosque raid, how a night of worship became a night of Zionist brutality. Footage of heavily armed Zionist soldiers smashing their batons and guns down on cowering Palestinian worshippers in Al-Aqsa Al-Qibla prayer hall during Ramadan sparked outrage worldwide on Wednesday morning. The reality, said Abdullah Jabbar, a teenager from Jerusalem who was assaulted in the prayer hall and detained by Zionist forces on Tuesday night, was much, much worse. They kept us on the ground, handcuffed for a long time, and anyone who raised his head was hit with a gun. My leg hurt, so I told the soldier, but he hit me on my chest and cursed me. Speaking after his release, Jabbar described the terrifying moment the Zionist forces forced their way into the holy site in occupied East Jerusalem, where Palestinians were practicing the contemplative prayer of Itikaf. Stun grenades and tear gas were fired into the 1,000-year-old building before soldiers threw Palestinians to the ground, stamped on them, and bound their heads forcefully behind their backs, or their hands forcefully behind their backs. Jabbar said the beatings did not stop once they were removed from the prayer hall. The Zionists hit the detained Palestinians with batons as they led them out of the hall and crammed them into a space near the masjid. Around 400 Palestinians were detained on Tuesday night. Even after they were taken to the police station, the assaults and insults continued, Jabbar said. Now free, the teenagers is nonetheless shaken and bruised after a night of worship became a night of brutality. Many of the detainees were forced to sign papers banning them from Al-Aqsa for a week as a condition of their release. For mothers of young men like Jabbar who were caught up in the assault, Tuesday night was fraught with anxiety and tension. Sana al-Rajabi was in constant contact with her son Ammar as the Zionists stormed the mosque until the line went dead. He'd been arrested and taken to an interrogation center with scores of other worshippers. I was worried to death for my son. At first, the worshippers were in Al-Qibli prayer hall and refused to leave. Then the brutal assault began on them by dozens of Zionist police officers using all forms of repression. Sound bombs, tear gas were fired at them while they were trapped inside the prayer hall, then the rubber bullets that hit many of them. Zionist forces began removing Palestinians from Al-Aqsa's courtyard around 10 p.m. Earlier, tens of thousands had attended Taraweeh prayers, as is customary during Ramadan. Several people stayed behind to practice Itikaf. Itikaf is a non-mandatory religious practice that's common in Ramadan, whereby worshippers stay inside mosque overnight to pray, reflect, and recite the Quran. While Zionists have refused to allow Palestinians to perform Itikaf this year and cleared people from the mosque after Taraweeh prayers, it had not used such excessive violence before Tuesday's assault. The Jewish holiday of Passover began on Wednesday, where Jewish Zionists are expected to gather at the Western Wall beside Al-Aqsa. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society and local media said dozens of Palestinians were injured in the crackdown. Medics were denied access to those hurt, and one assaulted outside their masjid. While the Zionist violence escalated, cries for help rang out over Al-Quds from minarets. Palestinians gathered in protest across the occupied West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and the Palestinian town of al-Fahm in northern Zionist Israel. Rockets were fired from Gaza, prompting Zionist airstrikes on the besieged enclave. As the situation deteriorated in the mosque, Rajabi and other Palestinians headed to Al-Aqsa trying to protect their loved ones and the holy site itself, but they were met with stun grenades and batons at one of the mosque's gates. Rajabi hasn't heard anything from Ammar since last night. He's still believed to be in Zionist custody, but his mother was able to identify him in the violent footage from the mosque. The last thing he told me was that the soldiers sprayed them with tear gas inside the prayer hall and beat them with rifles and metal chairs. Then they handcuffed them and took them outside, she said. On Wednesday morning, many of the detainees' families gathered outside Al-Quds Atarat police station. Zionist police tried to barter with the relatives for their release, witnesses said. Khalid Zabarka, a lawyer representing some of the detained worshippers, told MEE that he expects most of the Palestinians to be released, but some may be transferred elsewhere. They transferred them to the center in buses and then numbered them, he said, showing how the Palestinians were marked by pin on their shoulders. This is something new. From TRT World, airstrikes hit Gaza after Zionist police raid Al-Aqsa Mosque. Viral videos from inside Islam's third holiest site show women and children screaming for help as Zionist troops carry out merciless attack. Zionist planes have struck Gaza in response to rocket fire from the Palestinian enclave after Zionist police raided the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound overnight. Hamas radio reported that Zionist strikes early on Wednesday hit several targets within Gaza City and in a refugee camp. There were no immediate reports on casualties in Gaza. The airstrikes come after Zionist troops stormed Zionist or Islam's third holiest site in occupied Al-Quds, using gas bombs and sound grenades while Palestinians pray on the second week of Ramadan. Witnesses and Palestinian Red Crescent also reported that Zionist troops have beaten up worshippers, leaving many wounded, raising fears of wider tensions. Later on, the Palestinian Red Crescent said 12 Palestinians were wounded from rubber-tipped bullets and beatings. It added that Zionist forces were preventing its medics from reaching the area. Viral videos from inside Islam's third holiest site showed women and children screaming for help as Zionist troops carry out the attack. I was sitting on a chair reciting Quran, an elderly woman told the Reuters news agency outside the mosque, struggling to catch her breath. They hurled stun grenades, one of them hit my chest, she said as she began to cry. The worshippers chanted anti-Zionist slogans as they were forced to leave the masjid. Zionist soldiers also smashed windows of the southern part of the mosque, witnesses said. Zionist police in a statement, they arrested dozens of Palestinians who were practicing itikaf, a religious practice in which Muslims stay in the mosque overnight to pray and recite Holy Quran. Palestinian lawyer Faraz al-Jabrini said police arrested 500 people who were taken for questioning. Zionist police said they've arrested more than 350 people. The Zionist violence in occupied East Al-Quds triggered a wave of protests and condemnations from Palestinians. We warn the occupation against crossing red lines at holy sites, which will lead to a big explosion, said Nabil Abu Rodaini, a spokesperson for Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. In a statement, Turkey's foreign minister called the latest raid at Al-Aqsa unacceptable. The foreign ministry also said it's concerned about the overall surge of violence against Palestinians. Jordan's foreign ministry also condemned Zionist flagrant storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque, while Egypt called for immediate halt to Zionist blatant assault on Palestinian worshippers. Saudi Arabia condemned Zionist police action, saying it undermines police efforts. Meanwhile, Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abul-Gheit said, the extremist approaches that control the policy of the Zionist government will lead to widespread confrontations with the Palestinians if they're not put to an end. The organization is expected to hold an emergency meeting later on Wednesday over the incident. Jordan had called for the meeting in coordination with Egypt and Palestinian officials. Back in besieged Gaza, Hamas called for large protests, and people started gathering in the streets, with calls to head for the heavily guarded Gaza-Israel fence for more demonstrations. The Zionist military said 9 rockets were fired from Gaza toward Israel, of which at least 4 were intercepted and 4 landed in open areas. Tensions have been running high across the occupied West Bank, including East Al-Quds. Violence has surged over the last year as the Zionist military has carried out near-nightly raids on Palestinian cities, towns, and villages. At least 90 Palestinians have been killed by Zionist troops this year, according to an Associated Press tally. Palestinian attacks against Zionists have left 15 people dead in the same period. Zionists captured the West Bank, Al-Quds, and Gaza in 1967 Arab-Israeli War. It vacated from Gaza in 2005 and has since imposed a harsh blockade from land, air, and sea on the tiny Palestinian enclave. Over 700,000 illegal Zionist settlers now live in the occupied West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem. From Asharq al-Assad, Arab League condemns Zionist forces raid on Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Arab League on Wednesday condemned a raid by Zionist forces on the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. The extremist approaches that control the policy of the Zionist government will lead to a widespread confrontation with Palestinians if they're not put to an end, League Secretary General Ahmed Abul-Gheit said in a statement. Zionist police stormed into the mosque early Wednesday, firing stun grenades at Palestinian youths who hurled firecrackers at them in bursts of violence during a sensitive holiday season. Palestinian militants in Gaza responded with rocket fire on southern Zionist Israel, prompting repeated Zionist airstrikes. The fighting coming as Muslims mark the holiday month of Ramadan and Jews prepare to begin the Passover festival on Wednesday evening raised fears of a wider conflagration. Similar clashes 2 years ago erupted into a bloody 11-day war between Israel and the ruling Hamas group in Gaza. The official Palestinian news agency Wafa said that dozens of worshippers who were spending the night praying were injured in the police raid. The Zionist military said one soldier was shot in a separate incident in the occupied West Bank. The mosque sits on a sensitive hilltop compound holy to both Jews and Muslims. Al-Aqsa is the third holiest site in Islam, and it's typically packed with worshippers during Ramadan. Overnight, the scene of festive holiday markers picnicking and praying at the holy site transformed into one of violence as Zionist police stormed into the mosque, firing tear gas and stun grenades that shattered stained glass windows and fiercely beating worshippers with clubs and rifle butts, witnesses say. The spot known to Jews as the Temple Mount is also the holiest site in Judaism, revered as the location of the biblical Jewish temples. The conflicting claims fuel constant tensions that have spilled over to violence numerous times in the past. Since Ramadan began March 22nd, scores of Muslim worshippers have been trying to stay overnight in the masjid, a practice that's typically permitted only during the last 10 days of the month-long holiday. Zionist police have entered nightly to evict the worshippers, stirring tensions with young Palestinians who demand to pray at the holy site until dawn. Tensions over control of the holy site have been heightened by calls from Jewish ultranationalists to carry out a ritual slaughter of a goat in the compound, initiating the ancient ritual sacrifice executed on Passover in biblical times. Zionists bar ritual slaughters on the site, but calls by Jewish extremists to revive the practice, including offers of cash rewards to anyone who even attempts to bring an animal into the compound, have amplified fears among Muslims that Zionists are plotting to take over the site. Benjamin Netanyahu said he's committed to preserving the status quo at the compound. Now, 80,000 worshippers attending evening prayers at the mosque on Tuesday. Hundreds of Palestinians barricaded themselves inside the mosque overnight to pray. Worshippers said that after they refused to leave, Zionist police moved into the mosque, sitting on Palestinians with batons. Zionist police said they moved in after several law-breaking youths and masked agitators brought fireworks, sticks and stones, barricaded themselves into the mosque. Police said the youths chanted violent slogans and locked the front doors. And from aa.com.tr, EU deeply concerned by violence at Al-Quds Al-Aqsa Mosque. The European Union is deeply concerned by the violence at Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem and calls on all parties to show restraint at the time of religious holidays, an EU official said on Wednesday. Speaking at the European Commission's daily news briefing, Peter Stano, lead spokesperson on foreign affairs, confirmed that the EU follows very closely the developments in Zionist Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. The European Union is deeply concerned by the growing tensions and violence which we've seen overnight inside the compound of Al-Aqsa Mosque, he asserted. He also underlined that it's extremely important to preserve the historic status quo of the holy site. Stano condemned in strongest possible terms the rocket attacks from Gaza on the Zionist entity. He reiterated the bloc's call on both parties to exercise utmost restraint and refrain from actions that escalate tensions, particularly in this period of religious holidays. This year, a number of important holidays of the Abrahamic religions, the Jewish holiday of Passover, Christian Easter, and Muslim Ramadan are all celebrated in April. Earlier on Wednesday, the Zionist police said they'd detained 350 Palestinians at the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex in East Al-Quds. A group of Palestinians barricaded themselves in the Al-Qibla prayer hall in the complex after Jewish occupiers called for a raid on the mosque. In response, the Zionist entity police smashed windows and deployed flash charges, tear gas, and rubber bullets against the worshippers. For Muslims, Al-Aqsa represents Islam's third holiest site. Jews call the area the Temple Mount, saying it was the site of two Jewish temples in ancient times.
Beam me up, Mr. Spark.